Hey guys, I'm going to start with our first set of videos that have to do with reviewing all of the material that we did this year, just to help jog your memories before the test. They're going to be short videos that are less than 15 minutes each, and sometimes they'll cover one standard, sometimes they'll cover more than one. It just depends on what we are looking at. So the first video that I'm going to cover for you has to do with landforms. It's the one and only geography standard that we have for the school year. If you remember, it says that you had to be able to make some kind of presentation to explain what those landforms were. And if you remember, in your Canvas, I gave you 12 terms that I wanted you to find a picture, find a definition, and figure out what they were all about. So I'm going to use Gavin's because I can. He did a pretty good job on it, and so we'll just use his for an example of all the different ones. So let's go through it really quick. The first term was a valley. So a valley is a low area of land that's between two hills or mountains, possibly having a river between it. It might not always. So you have an area here that has higher elevation, and down in the middle, this one has a river. Could be a road, could just be cows. You never know. So this is a valley. The second one that we talked about was a rim. Now, the rim was one of the harder ones for us to find because there weren't very many examples of pictures of it. Here in Tennessee, we have the Highland Rim, which surrounds the Nashville Basin. So that would be a circular piece of land, similar to what's here in this picture, only I want you to picture it being pretty big, like big enough to fit a city or a town in the middle of it. This one is a very small rim-looking landform, but typically when we're talking about the Highland Rim in Tennessee, we're talking about a large, highly elevated circular area with low land in the middle and possibly low land around it on the outside. A plain really doesn't need much explanation other than it is a flat area of land that has very little trees and other landforms in it. You can see for a very long time because there's nothing to obstruct your view. So plain is an area of flat land with very little trees. A bluff is an area of high land that's usually carved out by wind or water. So thinking about cliffed edges of a continent or an area that is on land that would have been carved out either by the ocean, it could be eroded on the edges, kind of like how we looked when we were looking at the Ganges. So it's a high cliff area. Could be flat on top, doesn't always have to be. A swamp area is an area of wet land. It's soggy, it's squishy, it has trees and it has other plants, but it's usually covered by water, and it's probably not the best place for growing crops or plants. I want you to think about our first settlers who came and landed in the swampy, mosquito-infested area. They didn't last very long because it wasn't the best place for growing things. Our isthmus is a narrow strip of land that connects two larger land masses. It will have water on both sides. So if you're thinking about North America and South America, we have Panama that connects the two. You have the Atlantic Ocean on one side, you have the Pacific Ocean on the other, and it's a thin strip of land. Now, by thin, it doesn't always have to be like skinny like this one in the picture. I want you to picture something that could be thicker, that has roads. There's probably still buildings on it. It doesn't always have to be something itty-bitty like it looks in this picture. But it is a thin, narrow strip of land that connects two larger pieces of land. The next set, you have a gulf. If you remember, we studied a gulf, a bay, and an inlet. All three of them are C-shaped pieces of land that circle around water, usually ocean water. in this case, the Gulf is the largest one of the three. It's going to encircle, in this case, the Atlantic Ocean. Your bay is going to be smaller, and an inlet is going to be even smaller than that. So a sea is a large body of salt water, usually connecting to the ocean. It could be partly surrounded, it could be fully surrounded. It just depends on where it's located. But the marker of it is that it tends to be salt water. So I'm thinking like the Red Sea, the Dead Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, all of which you probably should have studied in 3rd grade. And your bay, just like I said, it's a C-shaped piece of land that has water in the center of it. It's usually smaller than a gulf. So in this case, I want you to think about the Hudson Bay that we studied when we were talking about our explorers. The Hudson Bay at the top of Canada, where Henry Hudson sailed himself in here and got stuck into some ice, and his people led a mutiny and knocked him off the boat, and he was never found again. A cape. So a cape is a pointed piece of land that sticks out into a lake, a river, an ocean, or whatever type of water that we're talking about. This one specifically would be Cape Cod. If you remember, our folks on the Mayflower came over and they parked themselves right here, and they took their little rowboats up to the shore where they landed at Plymouth, and the rest is history. But a cape is a piece of pointed land that sticks out into a larger body of water. I added mountains to the list. It's not really one of your landforms, but a mountain is a pointed shape piece of land. Actually, it's not always pointed. Sometimes, like here in the Appalachians, it's going to be rounded on the top. But it's a landform that really has a higher elevation than the area around it. Much more than a hill would be, I would suppose. I say the mountain so that you get the idea of a plateau. So a plateau is also an area of relatively high land. The thing about it is it looks like the top of the mountain has been cut off. So this area right here would be flat on top relatively, instead of having that peaked point on it like a mountain. But it is a higher elevation compared to what's around it. And so those are your 12 landforms that I asked you to study. You could see it on the test. You might not, but it's good to refresh your memory on what those are. So hope you enjoyed that and hope you remember it.